I was 29 when everything blew up, though looking back now, I should have seen it coming years earlier. My name's Dylan, and for most of my adult life, I practically lived at our family business. 70-hour weeks were my normal, dawn-to-dusk shifts, late-night calls, emergency weekend runs. I wore every hat: sales, logistics, troubleshooting, hiring, even cleaning the office when the janitor quit. I told myself it was worth it because one day, this business would be mine, or at least, I'd be a partner. My parents had always said that we were building a legacy together. I believed them. Then one rainy Thursday morning, over burnt coffee in the break room, I found out my entire future had been rewritten without me. I was going over invoices when my dad strolled in, looking oddly cheerful for a man who usually started the day with a grumble about fuel costs. He tossed me a pen, grinned, and said, "Well, it's official. Your brother's the boss now." I froze mid-sip. "What?" He leaned against the counter like this was good news. "We signed over the business last night. Your brother's the majority owner. He's a natural leader, Dylan. You've done great keeping things running, but this is the next step for the company." I just stared at him. My little brother, Ethan, who couldn't even remember to clock in on time, who'd spent the last 2 years using the company van to take his friends on camping trips. He was now in charge. Mom walked in a second later, carrying a stack of mail like this was a normal Tuesday. "Oh, don't look so surprised," she said, her tone a mix of cheerfulness and that slight edge she always got when I was being difficult. "You can still support him from the background. You're good at the operational stuff. Let him focus on the big picture." I set my coffee down before I threw it across the room. "So you gave him the business?" Just like that. No conversation. No warning. Dad's smirk was almost worse than the words. "We didn't think we needed your permission." That was the first time I walked out. Not quit. Not yet. But I left that morning without saying another word. I drove around for hours, replaying every sacrifice I'd made for this company. The birthdays I'd missed, the vacations I'd canceled, the relationships I'd ruined because I was always on call. And apparently, none of it mattered. When I showed up the next day, Ethan was already sitting in my chair. Literally. My office chair, feet kicked up on the desk, sipping soda from the company fridge. "Management's looking a little different these days, huh?" he said with a laugh. I kept my voice calm. Too calm, even to my own ears. "Move." He didn't. "Come on, man, lighten up. Dad says I should start learning the ropes." Thought I'd start here. Mom popped her head in at that exact moment, all smiles. "Dylan, be supportive. This is a big responsibility for your brother." I think that was the moment something inside me shifted. I realized they didn't just hand him the business. They expected me to keep propping him up, doing all the work so he could play CEO. I stopped staying late after that. If something broke at 8 p.m., I let it wait until morning. If Ethan forgot to place an order, I didn't scramble to cover for him. The first time I told Dad, "That's not my problem anymore," his face turned red. 2 weeks later, their biggest supplier pulled out. We'd relied on that account for years. I had personally maintained that relationship, called in favors, even driven across state lines once to fix a deal when things were falling apart. Losing them was a massive hit. Dad called me in a panic, voice tense. "You need to call them. Fix this." I leaned back in my chair at home and said, "Let the new boss handle it." He went quiet. For a long moment, I could hear him breathing on the other end, like he was trying to hold back his temper. Finally, he muttered, "We can't afford to lose them." "You should have thought about that before you made your decision," I said, and hung up. From that point on, it was like watching a slow-motion train wreck. Orders got delayed, clients started pulling contracts, morale tanked. Every time I walked past the office, I saw Ethan looking more and more stressed, like he hadn't realized running a business meant actually doing the work. The best part? They never once admitted they needed me. Not yet. Instead, Mom would send me little guilt-trip texts. "Family comes first, Dylan." Or Dad would leave voicemails about how we all need to pull together right now. And I ignored them. But then came the day that changed everything. The day they finally showed up at my apartment, looking pale and desperate, asking me to come back. And that's where things really started to get interesting. I wish I could say I felt some kind of satisfaction seeing them on my doorstep that morning, but honestly, I just felt tired. There they were, standing in the hallway like two kids called to the principal's office. Dad's jaw was tight. Mom had that pinched expression she got whenever she had to admit she was wrong, which wasn't often. Ethan wasn't with them, And that told me everything I needed to know. Can we come in? Mom asked, like we were casual neighbors dropping by to borrow sugar. I stepped aside without a word, watching them shuffle into my apartment like they were walking into enemy territory. Dad sat on the edge of the couch, looking at the floor. Mom tried to break the ice first. Things have been difficult at the company. I stayed standing. I noticed. There was a long pause before Dad finally spoke. We need your help, Dylan. You know those supplier relationships better than anyone. If we don't get them back, we're in serious trouble. It was almost funny, hearing him say we. The same man who'd signed my name off the company paperwork was suddenly including me again. So call your CEO, I said flatly. Mom winced. Dylan, please don't make this harder. Your brother is doing his best, but he's overwhelmed. He's just a natural leader? I cut in, and her mouth snapped shut. The silence that followed was heavy. Dad finally looked up, his eyes hard. If the business goes under, we all lose. Is that what you want? I didn't answer right away, because the truth was, I didn't know what I wanted yet. Part of me wanted to swoop in and save the day like I always had. Prove to them that I was the backbone of this company, the one who made it all work. But a bigger part of me wanted them to feel what I had felt when they blindsided me. Powerless, discarded, irrelevant. Go home, I said quietly. Figure out how to fix your mess. Dad muttered something under his breath as they left, but I didn't catch it. I didn't care enough to ask. The weeks that followed were strangely peaceful for me. For the first time in years, I had weekends free. I slept past 6 a.m. I started going to the gym, cooking actual meals instead of eating takeout at my desk. I even reconnected with some friends I'd been blowing off for years. But while my life got calmer, theirs clearly didn't. I started hearing things, employees venting to me over text about missed paychecks, late shipments, and Ethan disappearing for hours in the middle of the workday. One night, my phone buzzed with a message from Carla, our best sales rep. Is this really what you wanted? Watching us all go down with the ship. That one stung. I wasn't trying to take anyone else down with them. The employees were like family to me. At least, more family than my actual family felt like at that moment. Then came the day Ethan showed up at my gym. He was sweaty, out of breath, like he'd run here. You've got to come back, he said without preamble. I grabbed my water bottle and just stared at him. You've never set foot in here before. What's wrong? He ran a hand through his hair. Everything. The numbers are bad. Dad's yelling all the time. Mom's threatening to sell the house to cover payroll. I don't know what I'm doing, man. They keep saying I should just trust my instincts, but I don't even have instincts for this stuff. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered all those smug grins when they announced he was in charge, the way he'd lounged in my chair and joked about learning the ropes. This is what you wanted, I said. He swallowed hard. No, this is what they wanted. I never asked for this, Dylan. They just told me it was mine. That was the first honest thing he'd said to me in months, and it stopped me cold. I can't fix this for you, I said carefully, but I might be willing to help. On my terms. He blinked, confused. What does that mean? You'll find out, I said, and walked out, leaving him standing there in the parking lot. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a notepad and started writing down everything I knew about the business. Contacts, contracts, debts, assets, leverage points. I realized something as I made that list. I had way more power than I thought. Not just operational knowledge, but relationships, trust, influence. If I wanted to, I could pull this company out of the hole. Or I could burn it to the ground and watch from a distance while they scrambled. For the first time since that awful morning in the break room, I felt something other than anger or exhaustion. I felt calm, focused, in control. I didn't call them the next day, or the day after. I waited, letting them sweat, letting things get just a little bit worse. And then, just as I was about to set my plan in motion, something happened at the company that changed the game completely. Something that made me realize this wasn't just about business anymore. It was personal. I woke up that Monday to a flood of messages on my phone. Missed calls from employees, a few texts from Carla in all caps. Call me ASAP. It's bad. That was enough to get me dressed and in the car before I'd even had coffee. I wasn't planning on going to the office, but something in my gut told me I needed to see this for myself. When I got there, the parking lot was half empty, which was unusual for a Monday morning. I walked in and immediately felt it, that heavy, nervous tension in the air, like everyone was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Carla met me by the front desk, pale and furious. They laid off half the floor staff, she said without even saying hello. No notice. No severance. People showed up this morning and their badges didn't work. What? My voice echoed down the hallway. She nodded grimly. Your brother said it was the only way to save the business. They're clearing out people's lockers right now. I marched straight to the office, my heart pounding. The door to my old office was closed, but I could hear voices inside, my parents and Ethan. I didn't knock. I just walked in. Ethan was behind the desk, looking harried, while Mom was sitting stiffly in the guest chair and Dad was pacing like a general giving orders. They all froze when they saw me. Good. You're here, Dad said, like I'd been summoned. Maybe you can explain to Carla and the rest of the staff that this was necessary. Necessary, I repeated. You fired people who have worked here for 15 years with no notice. Mom clasped her hands in her lap, like she was trying to look sympathetic. It wasn't an easy decision, Dylan, but payroll was killing us. The company couldn't survive another month at this burn rate. And instead of talking to me, or even them, you just what? Locked them out. Ethan rubbed his forehead. It was Dad's call. He said, Don't throw me under the bus, Dad snapped. We're all doing what we can to keep this company afloat. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These were people who had been loyal through thick and thin, who had stayed late nights with me to meet impossible deadlines, who had celebrated birthdays in this building. And they'd been tossed aside like they didn't matter. You could have sold some of the assets, I said coldly. Scaled back production. Negotiated with vendors. There were options. Dad's face darkened. I don't need a lecture from someone who walked out when things got hard. I took a step closer. I walked out because you lied to me. Because you gave away everything I'd worked for without a second thought. Don't pretend this is my fault. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mom said something that made my stomach drop. We used your savings. I blinked. What? She glanced nervously at Dad before continuing. The business account was dry. We had to move some money around to make payroll last month. Your personal savings were sitting there and used, and we figured. You what? My voice cracked like a whip. Dad stepped in, defensive now. You weren't using it. And we were desperate. It's not like you're homeless. You should be willing to make sacrifices for the family. I could actually feel my pulse in my temples. That money was everything I'd managed to save in 10 years. The only reason I'd kept working those 70-hour weeks without demanding a salary that matched my output. I had plans for that money. A house. A future. You stole from me. I said quietly, my voice shaking with rage. Mom's eyes filled with tears. Don't be dramatic. I slammed my hand on the desk so hard the coffee mug rattled. You stole from me. The room went silent. Ethan just stared at the floor, guilt written all over his face. Dad didn't flinch. He just folded his arms. If the company survives, you'll get it back. But we needed it more than you did. That was it. The line they couldn't uncross. It wasn't just about them choosing Ethan anymore. It was about them taking everything I had left and acting like I should thank them for it. I turned on my heel and walked out, ignoring Mom calling my name. Carla was still standing by the front desk when I passed, and she must have seen my face because she didn't say a word. I just got in my car, drove home, and sat there in silence for an hour. That night, I went through every account, every email, every file I had access to, and I still had a lot. My name might not have been on the business anymore, but my fingerprints were everywhere. I knew where every contract was stored, every supplier's pain point, every client's tolerance level. I knew which of our competitors were circling, waiting for a chance to poach. And for the first time, I didn't feel helpless. I didn't feel like the discarded son or the overlooked workhorse. I felt like someone holding all the cards, watching the other players sweat. But there was one more blow coming. One more betrayal that would turn this from a personal feud into a war. 3 days later, I got a letter in the mail. It was from the company's legal department. Well, what was left of it, informing me that I was being sued for breach of fiduciary duty. I laughed out loud when I read it, the sound sharp and bitter in my empty apartment. They were claiming that by leaving, I had caused damages to the company, that I had sabotaged them by refusing to step in when things went bad. They were trying to make me the scapegoat for their mess. I sat there for a long time with that letter in my hand, and then I smiled. Not the bitter, hollow smile I'd had the day they told me Ethan was the new owner. A real smile. If they wanted a fight, they were about to get one, just not the kind they were expecting. Because now, it wasn't about saving the company anymore. It was about making sure they understood exactly what they had thrown away and watching them pay for every single choice they'd made. And that was the night I started building the kind of revenge you don't come back from. After the lawsuit letter, something in me hardened. I stopped taking their calls altogether. When Mom texted me pleading emojis and "we can fix this," I let the messages sit unread. When Dad left me voicemails saying I was being childish, I deleted them without listening past the first 5 seconds. And when Ethan sent a single, desperate text, "Please just talk to me," I turned my phone face down on the table and sat in silence, letting the hum of my apartment fill the room. But silence didn't mean inaction. I took a hard look at my life, at what I'd let myself become. For years, I'd been chained to that business, convinced that if I just worked hard enough, I'd earn a seat at the table. But that was the problem. I wasn't at the table. I was on the menu. I was the free labor, the reliable son, the one who didn't make waves. The one they thought would keep sacrificing himself no matter how little they gave back. Not anymore. I started pulling together every scrap of documentation I had. Emails, signed contracts, payment histories, text messages where Dad had directed me to make certain deals. I backed up everything to an encrypted drive, partly for legal protection, partly because I knew it would matter later. If they wanted to accuse me of sabotage, I'd show them exactly how many fires I'd put out over the years, and how many I'd kept from burning the whole building down. Then I started talking to people. Quietly. I called Marcus, our main supplier's rep, the one who had pulled out a month ago. We'd been friends for years, and he'd always respected the way I handled things. I didn't badmouth my family. I didn't have to. All I did was ask how things were going since they left our contract. "Better than I expected," Marcus admitted. "Your brother tried to renegotiate terms we'd agreed on for years. It was insulting. We went with another buyer." "Shame, really. You always kept things fair." That conversation confirmed what I already knew. I was the glue. Without me, every deal they had was on borrowed time. Next, I reached out to a few of our key clients. Casual conversations, under the radar. I asked how they were feeling about their accounts, how they were being treated, if they'd noticed any changes. The answers were depressingly predictable: late deliveries, missed emails, a lack of professionalism. One client, one of our top 3 accounts, told me outright, "We're giving them 30 more days before we switch providers." I didn't tell my family that, of course. I just thanked the client for their honesty and filed that little piece of information away. Meanwhile, I started rebuilding myself outside of them. I picked up consulting work on the side, something I never had time for when I was drowning in my family's business. Word spread fast. Apparently, people had always known I was the one doing the heavy lifting behind the scenes, and they were happy to pay me for my expertise now that I was on my own. For the first time in years, I had money coming in that was mine. No dad controlling the purse strings, no mom borrowing from my savings without asking. Just me, my work, and my bank account slowly refilling. But as my life started to rise from the ashes, the company's decline became impossible to ignore. I drive past the building sometimes, not to go in, just to watch. Trucks that used to load up twice a day were now sitting idle. Half the parking lot was empty. The few employees who were left looked exhausted, carrying the weight of a sinking ship. One Friday evening, Carla called me. Her voice was shaking. "They cut our hours again," she said. No warning. Just an email saying we're all down to 30 hours a week until further notice. People are crying, "Dylan, we don't know how we're supposed to pay rent." My chest ached hearing it. These weren't just names on a payroll sheet to me. These were people I'd laughed with, stayed late with, celebrated milestones with. And my parents had treated them like disposable assets. "I'm sorry, Carla," I said softly. "Hold on a little longer. Things are going to change." I didn't know exactly how yet, but I meant every word. The final push came 2 weeks later. I was at a small cafe downtown, laptop open, working on a new consulting proposal, when I saw Ethan through the window. He looked like a ghost, pale, shoulders slumped, dark circles under his eyes. He spotted me and came in without hesitation. "Can we talk?" he asked, and I nodded toward the empty chair across from me. He sat down heavily and ran his hands over his face. "They're selling off equipment now," he said. "Dad's talking about taking out another loan. Mom's, I don't even know. She's barely speaking to me. She keeps saying this is my fault, that I'm not living up to what they trusted me with." I didn't say anything, just let him get it out. Finally, he looked at me with something close to desperation. "I can't do this anymore, Dylan. I didn't even want this job, you know? They just handed it to me and said I'd figure it out. But I'm drowning, and they still won't admit they made a mistake. That was the first time I saw my brother for what he really was. Not just the golden child who got everything handed to him, but another pawn in their game. They'd set him up to fail just as much as they'd set me up to be their workhorse. I'm not coming back to save them, I said quietly. He nodded like he'd expected that. I didn't think you would. But if you were going to, what would you do? That question hung in the air like smoke. I closed my laptop and leaned in. I'd rebuild it my way. Clean house. Start fresh. No more favoritism, no more secrets. But I'm not sure there's anything left worth saving. He swallowed hard. If you ever decide to do it, I'm on your side. That surprised me. For months, I'd seen Ethan as the enemy, but now he looked like someone who wanted out just as badly as I had. After he left, I sat in the cafe for a long time, staring at my untouched coffee. The company was circling the drain. My parents were still too proud to admit they'd ruined it. And now even their chosen heir was ready to jump ship. This wasn't just rock bottom for them. It was rock bottom for all of us. But rock bottom has a funny way of clarifying things. It strips away illusions. It shows you who you really are and what you really want. And as I walked home that night, I realized what I wanted wasn't just to watch them fail. I wanted to rise, higher than I ever had before. I wanted to take back what was stolen from me, on my terms, in a way that made it impossible for them to ever treat me like I was second best again. And so, for the first time, I started putting together an actual plan. Not just vague ideas or angry daydreams. A real, tangible strategy. A way to rebuild, not just for me, but for the people they had hurt. But before I could move forward, there was one last thing I had to do. One final conversation that would either blow the whole thing up or give me the leverage I needed. And that conversation? It was going to happen with my father, face to face. I scheduled the meeting with my dad on a Wednesday afternoon, knowing he'd be at the office alone. Mom usually left by 2 on Wednesdays, and Ethan had started working from home more often, which I knew really meant hiding from the chaos. I wanted Dad without an audience. When I walked into the building, the place felt eerily quiet. The receptionist was gone, probably one of the layoffs. The phones that used to ring constantly were silent. It felt less like a business and more like an abandoned shell of what used to be. Dad was in his office when I walked in, hunched over a stack of papers. He looked up, startled, then scowled. "You have some nerve showing up here unannounced," he said. I shut the door behind me and sat across from him. "We need to talk." He tossed his pen down. "We've been trying to talk to you for weeks. You're the one who walked away." "No," I said evenly. "You walked away. From me, from everything I built here. You signed me out of the company and gave my work to someone who didn't even want it. You made me the enemy." He leaned back, crossing his arms. "I made the decision that was best for this company. And how's that working out for you?" I asked quietly. For a moment, the mask slipped. His jaw tightened, and I saw it, the fear, the desperation, the knowledge that he was losing control. "What do you want, Dylan?" he asked finally, his voice quieter now. I smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Leverage." He frowned. "Excuse me. You sued me." I reminded him, pulling the letter from my bag and laying it on his desk. So I did some digging. Turns out I still have access to quite a bit of documentation. Invoices, emails, signed directives with your signature on them. His face paled slightly. "I have proof," I continued, "that I was the one handling 90% of this company's operations for years. Proof that I kept this place afloat when you were out of town and Ethan was on vacation. Proof that you used my personal savings without consent. If you want to drag me into court and claim I abandoned my fiduciary duty, go ahead. I'll show the judge exactly how much unpaid labor I put into this business while you treated me like a volunteer." For a long time, he didn't say anything. I could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Finally, he cleared his throat. "What are you asking for?" I leaned forward, my voice steady. "Drop the lawsuit. Return every cent you took from my savings with interest. And when this company finally collapses, because let's be honest, it's heading there, I want first rights to buy it out. At liquidation value." He actually laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You think I'd let you take over what I built?" I stood up, taking the letter back. "You won't have a choice. Because the moment this goes public, your reputation is done. Your clients will walk, your suppliers will blacklist you, and your employees will know exactly who gutted their livelihoods." I didn't wait for him to respond. I just walked out, leaving him staring at the empty doorway. That was the moment things shifted for good. Over the next few weeks, I became a shadow, not involved directly, but always present, always watching. I met with employees who'd been laid off, asking them what they needed most. I reached out to suppliers, floating the idea that I might start something new, something fairer. To my surprise, almost every single one said the same thing. If you do, we're with you. I even had lunch with two of our biggest clients. I kept it casual, asking about their future plans, their frustrations. Both admitted they were already looking for alternatives. One of them said outright, "If you were still running things, we wouldn't be leaving." That statement hit me harder than I expected. I started sketching out what my own company would look like: leaner, smarter, with better pay and real investment in the people who kept it running. I found a small warehouse on the edge of town that had been sitting empty for months and reached out to the owner about leasing. I even talked to a banker about startup loans. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to what my family did. I was acting on my own terms. Meanwhile, the family business was circling the drain faster than ever. Equipment sales brought in some quick cash, but it wasn't enough. Payroll kept shrinking. One by one, key staff quit. Carla texted me one night, "I'm giving my 2 weeks tomorrow. I can't do this anymore." I told her to wait. "Hold out a little longer," I wrote back. "I have a plan. And when I move, I want you with me." She replied instantly, "Then I'm in. Just say when." Ethan stopped by my apartment again a few days later. He looked even worse than before, but there was a strange relief in his face when I opened the door. "Dad's furious," he said as soon as he walked in. "He says you threatened him. He says you're trying to destroy the company." "I'm not trying," I said, motioning for him to sit. "He's doing that all on his own. I'm just making sure when it happens, I'm ready to pick up the pieces." To my surprise, Ethan nodded. "Good, because I think I want in." That made me pause. "You want in?" He nodded again, more firmly this time. "If you really are going to rebuild, I want to be part of it. I'm done letting them use me as a puppet." I studied him for a moment, trying to decide if I believed him. And for the first time, I realized I did. "Fine," I said at last. "But if you're in, you play by my rules. No shortcuts, no favoritism. We do this right." He grinned faintly, and for the first time in months, I saw my brother, not the entitled golden boy, but the kid who used to sit with me in the garage building model cars until midnight. "Deal," he said. That night, I stayed up until 2 in the morning finalizing my plan. I called the banker the next day and secured the funding. I signed the lease on the warehouse. I drafted offer letters for the employees I wanted to bring with me. The pieces were falling into place. And just when everything was ready, just when I had my new company poised to launch, the final domino tipped. The family business missed payroll. For the first time in its history, they couldn't pay their people. And that was the moment I knew it was time to act. When I heard about the missed payroll, I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel guilt either. What I felt was inevitability. This was the point of no return. The moment where everything they'd built, everything they'd sacrificed me for, finally crumbled under the weight of their own decisions. Carla called me that morning, her voice shaking. "People are walking out, Dylan. Like literally just leaving mid-shift. They say they're not coming back until they get paid." "Good," I said softly. "Good?" she repeated, incredulous. "Yes. Hold on. I'm about to give them somewhere else to go." I hung up and got to work. The first step was assembling my list. The people I trusted most, the ones who had stayed loyal to me even after I left. Carla was at the top. Then Miguel from shipping, who had kept the loading docks running like a well-oiled machine. Then Lacey from accounting, who quietly texted me updates every few weeks about just how bad things were getting. I sent them all the same message. "Meet me tonight, 7 p.m., at the warehouse on 3rd. No questions. Trust me." By 6 that evening, I was pacing the concrete floor of the warehouse, my breath visible in the chilly air. The place was empty but full of potential, wide open space, high ceilings, room to grow. I'd already signed the lease and negotiated a 6-month grace period before the first payment was due. If I moved fast, we could be operational in weeks. One by one, they arrived. Carla first, her coat pulled tight against the cold, then Miguel, then Lacey. Soon there were nearly a dozen people standing in a loose circle, murmuring questions. I stepped into the center and took a deep breath. "I called you here because it's time," I said, my voice echoing off the walls. "You've all seen what's happening at the company. You know it's not coming back from this. I'm not asking you to save it. I'm asking you to help me build something new. There was a long silence. Then Carla crossed her arms. And how exactly do you plan to do that? We don't have equipment. We don't have trucks. We don't even have a payroll right now. I smiled. We will. I've secured funding. I've got a lease on this place. I've already lined up 2 suppliers who are willing to work with me the moment we're ready to start production. And if I have the right team, I looked around the circle, meeting each pair of eyes. I can land clients before the end of the month. Miguel let out a low whistle. You're serious. Dead serious. Lacey spoke next, hesitant but hopeful. And what happens when your parents find out? Then they find out, I said simply. But by the time they do, it'll be too late to stop us. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Carla stepped forward and held out her hand. I'm in, she said. One by one, the others followed. That night, we stayed in the warehouse for hours, huddled around a folding table with notebooks and laptops, mapping out everything: staffing needs, timelines, supply chains. Miguel made a list of the equipment we'd need to get started. Lacey began sketching out a budget. Carla started drafting letters to potential clients, positioning us as the better alternative, faster, more reliable, built on trust. When I left that night, I felt lighter than I had in months. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to my parents' choices. I was making my own. The next step was leverage. I knew my parents' finances were strained, but I didn't know how badly until Lacey slid a folder across the table at our next meeting. They're months behind on payments to half their vendors, she said quietly. If someone, say, a competitor, made a better offer, those vendors would drop them in a heartbeat. I nodded slowly. Then that's exactly what we'll do. Within a week, I had personally called every vendor I had a relationship with. I didn't trash talk my parents, didn't beg them to switch. I simply laid out my vision. A smaller, more agile operation. Fair contracts. Guaranteed payment on time, every time. Nearly all of them agreed to come on board the moment we went live. Meanwhile, Ethan started feeding me inside information. He'd become my quiet ally, staying just close enough to my parents to know what they were planning, but far enough away to avoid being dragged under with them. They're talking about selling the last truck to make payroll, he told me one night, sounding exhausted. If they do that, they won't be able to deliver orders even if they get new clients. Let them, I said. The more they strip this thing down, the easier it will be to rebuild without them. And then came the final piece of the puzzle, the confrontation. I didn't want to wait until they found out on their own. No, I wanted them to know what was coming. I wanted them to see me standing on my own 2 feet, calm and unshaken, as I told them exactly how this was going to play out. So I called Dad and told him we needed a family meeting. When I walked into their house that Saturday, Mom was at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, her expression tight. Dad was by the window, staring out at the driveway like he'd been waiting for me. Ethan sat at the far end of the table, silent. What is this about? Mom asked, her voice cool. I sat down across from them and folded my hands. I wanted to tell you face to face so there's no confusion later. I'm starting my own company. Mom blinked. You can't be serious. I'm very serious, I said. I've got funding, I've got a team, and I've got suppliers ready to go. When you go under, and you will, I'll be ready to take over your contracts. The business won't die. It just won't belong to you anymore. Dad's face turned red. You think you can just steal what I built? I'm not stealing anything, I said evenly. I'm offering your employees a lifeboat. You left them to sink. I'm giving them a chance to survive. Mom's voice was sharp. This is revenge. That's what this is. I met her gaze without flinching. You're right. It is. And it's also justice. You stole my future, you stole my savings, and you sued me for not saving you from yourselves. This is me taking back control. Ethan spoke up then, quietly but firmly. I'm with him. Mom turned on him, horrified. You can't mean that. I do, he said. I can't keep doing this. You've run this company into the ground and blamed everyone but yourselves. I'm done being your scapegoat. For a long moment, no one spoke. The kitchen was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Finally, Dad slammed his hand on the table. If you think you're going to destroy us and get away with it, you've got another thing coming. I stood, calm, collected. I'm not destroying you. You did that yourselves. I'm just making sure when the dust settles, there's something left for the people who deserve it. I left them sitting there, stunned and furious. And as I walked out to my car, I felt the shift. The power was mine now. They could rage, they could threaten, But the truth was clear. I had the employees, the suppliers, the future. All that was left was to let the collapse finish what I had started and be ready to catch everything when it fell. The following week felt like the calm before a storm, except I wasn't afraid of it. I was the storm. I had timed everything down to the day. The suppliers had been primed, the employees had their contracts ready, and the banker had finalized the transfer of funds to my account. All I had to do was wait for the right moment to pull the trigger, and the missed payroll had set the perfect stage. The first domino fell on Monday morning. Carla was the one who lit the match. She gathered the remaining employees, all 12 of them, in the break room and announced that they were done. "We've been loyal for years," she said, her voice shaking but strong. "But loyalty doesn't pay rent. We deserve better than this. So we're leaving." Dad stormed out of his office, red-faced and shouting, "If you walk out that door, you're blacklisted from this industry." Carla didn't even flinch. "Funny," she said, "because I already have a new offer on the table, and I think most of us will be taking it." And just like that, they left, together, a silent line of people walking out the front doors for the last time. Miguel was the last to go, pausing just long enough to toss his ID badge onto the counter before following the others out. Within an hour, production had ground to a halt. There was no one left to run the machines, no one to process orders, no one to pick up the phones. I was standing in my new warehouse when Carla and the others arrived. They looked lighter, relieved, even though the situation was still risky. "Welcome home," I told them. We got to work immediately. By the end of the day, the new company, my company, had a name, a logo, and a launch plan. Lacey had already filed the paperwork to make it official. The suppliers I'd courted for weeks sent over their contracts, ready to start shipping the moment we were operational. And then came the moment I'd been waiting for. I called the top 3 clients personally. "This is Dylan," I told them, my voice calm but confident. "I know you've been frustrated with service lately. I wanted you to know that I'm starting a new operation, smaller, leaner, but with the same reliability you remember. If you want to switch, I can have you on board within a week." All 3 said yes. Just like that. By Wednesday, word had gotten out. My parents were livid. I knew because Mom showed up at my apartment, unannounced, just like they had the first time they'd begged me to return. "How could you do this?" she demanded the moment I opened the door. "You're tearing this family apart." I didn't invite her in. I stood in the doorway, calm and unshaken. "No," I said quietly. "You tore this family apart the day you decided I wasn't worth a conversation before signing me out of my own future. All I'm doing is cleaning up the mess you left behind." Her lip trembled. "Your father is furious. He says he'll take legal action." "Let him," I said. "I have documentation that will bury him if he tries. He knows it." For the first time, she didn't have a response. She just stood there, clutching her purse like it was a lifeline. "This doesn't have to be ugly," I added. "You could walk away with some dignity left. But if you keep fighting me, you're going to lose everything." She left without another word. That night, I stood in the middle of the warehouse watching the team unpack new equipment. The air smelled of dust and fresh paint, and there was a buzz of energy I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just business, it was possibility. And then, as if the universe was rewarding my patience, the final piece fell into place. Lacey came running over with her laptop. "You have to see this," she said breathlessly. She turned the screen toward me, and there it was, the announcement that my parents' company had defaulted on its largest loan. The bank was seizing assets. Trucks, machines, everything. "This is it," I said softly. The next morning, I put on my best suit and drove to the auction. It wasn't glamorous, just a handful of bidders and a tired-looking bank representative. But when the bids opened, I raised my paddle with a calm confidence I didn't feel the first time I'd walked out of that company. One by one, I bought everything. The machines, the trucks, even the office furniture. And I got it all for pennies on the dollar. When the paperwork was signed and the keys were in my hand, I didn't go straight to the warehouse. No, I drove back to the office, one last time. Dad was there, sitting in the empty space like a king without a throne. "You," he said when I walked in, his voice shaking with fury. "Me," I agreed. I set the keys down on the counter. "These are mine now." His face went white. "You think this makes you better than us?" "No," I said, my voice calm. "It just makes me free." I turned to leave, but stopped in the doorway. "Oh," I added over my shoulder, "and I'll be moving the equipment out by the end of the week. You might want to lock up before then. Wouldn't want someone to break in." I didn't wait for his response. I walked out into the sunlight, the keys jingling in my hand like a victory bell. But this wasn't over yet. No, the real revenge would come when the world saw the rise, when the clients, the vendors, and the community saw that the son they dismissed had built something better, stronger, and fairer than they ever did. And when the first contracts started rolling in, when my parents realized that not only had I taken the company they refused to give me, but I had turned it into something they could never have imagined, that would be the moment I'd been waiting for all along. And I was only days away from making that moment happen. Launch day didn't feel like a launch day. It felt like the first day of my real life. The warehouse was spotless, the equipment humming softly like a promise, and the smell of fresh paint still clung to the walls. Carla stood next to me, clipboard in hand, already barking out instructions like she'd been doing this for years. Miguel and his crew were unloading the trucks we'd bought at auction, wearing matching grins. At exactly 9 a.m., the first client walked through the door to sign our contract in person. By noon, two more had arrived. Lacey was at her desk fielding calls, her face glowing as she mouthed, "Another one switching." By the end of the first week, we had replaced almost every major account my parents' company had lost and taken half the ones they still had left. But it wasn't just the clients. It was the energy. The employees were laughing again, staying late because they wanted to, not because they were scared of losing their jobs. I made sure everyone was paid on time, early, even, and gave them all a small signing bonus out of my own pocket. The first time I saw one of the new hires crying in the break room because no boss has ever done that for me, I realized just how far the old company had fallen. Word spread fast. Our name was suddenly on everyone's lips. Suppliers bragged about working with us. Clients recommended us to other businesses. Even the local paper did a small feature about the new player shaking up the industry. And then, inevitably, my parents came to see it for themselves. It was a Friday afternoon when they showed up at the warehouse. The parking lot was full, trucks coming and going, employees waving to each other, music playing from somewhere in the back. I met them just inside the loading bay. Mom looked pale, Dad looked angry, and Ethan stood a few feet behind them with his arms crossed, making it clear he wasn't here on their side. "This is what you've been doing?" Dad said, sweeping an arm at the bustling floor. "This is what I've built," I corrected him calmly. "You stole everything from us," Mom said, her voice brittle. "No," I said, stepping closer so they couldn't miss a word. "I offered you chance after chance to do the right thing. You ignored me. You signed me out of the business, stole my savings, sued me for walking away, and blamed everyone but yourselves for the mess you made. I didn't steal this. I earned it." For a moment, they just stood there, silent. The noise of the warehouse went on around us, a constant reminder that life was moving forward, with or without them. "You could still come back," Mom said suddenly, her tone soft, almost pleading. "We could rebuild together. As a family." I actually laughed at that, a short, disbelieving sound. "Rebuild what? There's nothing left to rebuild. Your company is gone, and you did that yourselves. This is the future now, and you're welcome to watch from the sidelines." Dad's face turned red. "You think this makes you some kind of hero?" "No," I said simply. "It just makes me free." They left without another word, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the crushing weight of trying to win their approval. I didn't feel the guilt or the anger or the exhaustion. I felt peace. Over the next few months, the old company was formally dissolved. The bank sold off what little remained. The building was emptied and eventually listed for sale. My parents tried starting a smaller operation out of their garage, but with no employees, no suppliers, and no clients, it fizzled out within a few months. Meanwhile, my company thrived. We doubled our staff by the end of the first quarter and had to lease the neighboring warehouse for more space. Clients began referring new business faster than we could keep up. We implemented profit sharing for the employees, and morale skyrocketed. One evening, months later, I drove past the old office building. It was dark, the windows dusty, a for lease sign swinging in the breeze. For a moment, I just sat there in my car, staring at it, remembering all the nights I'd spent inside working until my eyes blurred. And then I smiled. Because that building wasn't my prison anymore. It was just an empty shell, a reminder of who I used to be and how far I'd come. A few weeks later, we had a company barbecue outside the warehouse. Employees brought their families, music played, and kids ran around the parking lot. Carla stood next to me, holding a plate of food, and said, "You know, they talk about you like you're some kind of legend. The guy who wouldn't let them sink." I looked out at my team, my people, laughing, eating, living. "I'm not a legend," I said softly. "I'm just finally where I'm supposed to be." And that night, as I locked up and turned off the lights, I glanced once more toward the empty road that led back to my parents' house. I thought about all the years I'd spent chasing their approval, waiting for them to see my worth. But I didn't need them to see it anymore. They could keep their silence, their pride, their empty house filled with regrets. Because I had built something real, and this time, no one could take it from me. I locked the door behind me, smiled to myself, and whispered the words I'd waited years to say. Checkmate.